What if I told you that while most of America was enforcing Jim Crow laws, there was a black family building a financial empire so powerful that it would become known as Black Wall Street? Not in New York, not in Chicago, but in Durham, North Carolina. And what if I told you that this family's secrets to generational wealth could change everything you thought you knew about building fortune in America? Today, we're diving deep into the untold story of the Spaulding family and the dynasty. They built a dynasty so influential that it challenged the very foundations of white supremacy in the early 1900s. This isn't just a rags to riches story. This is a masterclass in strategic wealth building, political maneuvering, and survival against impossible odds. So buckle up, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand why this family's story has been hidden in plain sight for over a century, and what lessons we can learn from their incredible journey. But first, let me ask you something. Have you ever heard of Durham's Black Wall Street? Drop a comment below and let me know, because I guarantee what you're about to discover will blow your mind. Chapter 1. The Beginning. The man who started it all. Let's rewind to 1874. Charles Clinton Spaulding was born in Columbus County, North Carolina, just 9 years after the Civil War ended. Think about that timing for a second. His parents were likely born into slavery. The wounds of that brutal system were still fresh, still bleeding across the South. But here's where the story gets interesting. Charles Spaulding, as it would come to be known, wasn't born into wealth. He wasn't born into privilege. He was born into a world that was actively hostile to his very existence. North Carolina, like most of the South, was implementing black codes laws specifically designed to keep African Americans in economic servitude even after slavery was abolished. So how do you build wealth in a system designed to keep you poor? S early life reads like a blueprint for resilience. He worked odd jobs throughout his youth: bellboy, dishwasher, waiter. But here's the first secret that most people miss. CC was always observing, always learning, always watching how business worked. In his late 20s, CC moved to Durham, North Carolina. Now, you might be wondering why Durham. What was so special about this particular city in North Carolina? Here is what most history books won't tell you. Durham in the 1890s was experiencing an economic boom, but it wasn't accessible to black residents through traditional means. The tobacco industry was exploding, thanks largely to companies like Duke Tobacco. But black entrepreneurs were systematically excluded from this wealth. So they created their own economy. And this is where C.C. Spaulding's genius begins to reveal itself. In 1899, just 1 year before the turn of the century, C.C. joined a small, struggling insurance company called the North Carolina Mutual and Provident Association. It had been founded by a barber named John Merrick and a doctor named Aaron McDuffie Moore. Now here's the thing. That's absolutely wild. In their first month of business, after paying commissions, the company collected exactly $1.12. $1.12. Let that sink in. The foundation of what would become the largest black-owned business in America started with the equivalent of what you'd spend on a single coffee today. But CC saw something others didn't. He saw a gap in the market that nobody was filling. Think about it. Who was selling life insurance to black people in 1899? Virtually nobody. White-owned insurance companies either refused to insure black lives or charged astronomical premiums based on racist assumptions about mortality rates. So CC, John Merrick, and Dr. Moore created a solution. They would insure their own community. But here's where the story takes its first dramatic turn. Chapter 2. The Secret Formula. How they built an empire. Now, starting an insurance company with $1.12 might sound insane. And honestly, it kinda was. But C.C. Spaulding had something that could be measured in $C, had a strategy that was decades ahead of its time. And this strategy contains the first major secret to understanding how this family built and maintained generational wealth. Are you ready for this? CC understood something fundamental that most entrepreneurs miss. You don't just sell a product. You build a movement. Let me explain what I mean. In 1900, CC essentially took over the operations of North Carolina Mutual. He didn't just hire salespeople to sell insurance policies. He recruited community leaders, pastors, teachers, Respected elders, people who were already trusted within black communities. And here's the brilliant part. He taught these agents that they weren't just selling insurance. They were selling hope. They were selling dignity. They were selling the promise that when someone in their family died, they wouldn't have to pass a hat around the church to afford a burial. Do you see the genius in that? CC turned insurance into a form of community empowerment. And because of that emotional and social connection, North Carolina Mutual grew at an explosive rate. By 1906, just 7 years after that, $1.12. First month the company moved its headquarters to Parish Street in Durham. And this is where things get really interesting. Because C.C. Spaulding didn't just want to build a company. He wanted to build an ecosystem. Here's the second secret. True wealth isn't built in isolation. It's built through interconnected systems. Around the same time that North Carolina Mutual was taking off, C.C. and his partners helped establish the Mechanics and Farmers Bank in 1908. Think about the strategy here. They now controlled both insurance and banking for the black community. If you bought insurance from North Carolina Mutual, you could bank with Mechanics and Farmers. If you banked with Mechanics and Farmers, they'd encourage you to get insurance through North Carolina Mutual. It was a closed-loop economic system that kept wealth circulating within the black community instead of constantly flowing out to white-owned businesses. And here's what's absolutely crazy. This model worked so well that by the 1920s, Parish Street in Durham was being called Black Wall Street. Now, I know some of you might be thinking of Tulsa, Oklahoma's Black Wall Street, which was tragically destroyed in the 1921 massacre. But here's a crucial difference to Durham's Black Wall Street survived. It thrived, and it became a blueprint for black economic development across America. But success like this doesn't come without enemies. Chapter 3. The Hidden Threats. Well, they don't. Teach in history class here, as something they definitely do you want to teach you in school. Building black wealth in the early 1900s was not just difficult, it was dangerous. Let me give you some context. In 1898, just 1 year before C.C. joined North Carolina Mutual, a horrific event occurred in Wilmington, North Carolina, just 130 miles from Durham. A mob of white supremacists literally overthrew the city's government in what historians now recognize as the only successful coup d'etat in American history. They massacred dozens of black residents. They destroyed black-owned businesses. They terrorized an entire community. And why? Because black people in Wilmington had become too economically successful. So imagine being C.C. Spaulding in Durham, watching this happen, and deciding to build black wealth anyway. Think about the courage that required. Think about the strategic thinking necessary to succeed without triggering violent backlash. And this brings us to the third major secret of the Spaulding legacy, one that is controversial, but absolutely critical to understand. Strategic accommodation. C.C. Spaulding walked an incredibly fine line. He was building black economic power in the heart of the Jim Crow South, but he did it in a way that didn't directly challenge white political supremacy. Now, before you judge this approach, let me ask you something. What would you have done? Would you have fought overtly and risked everything being destroyed like Tulsa or Wilmington? Or would you have built power quietly, systematically, ensuring that the wealth you created could be passed down to future generations? There's no easy answer to that question. C.C. participated in what some historians call the politics of respectability. He emphasized education, moral character, and entrepreneurship. He gave speeches about black self-improvement. He positioned North Carolina Mutual as a company that would prove black people could be just as capable and successful as white Americans if just given the opportunity. Some modern critics argue this approach was too accommodating to white supremacy. Others argue it was the only realistic strategy for survival and wealth building during that era. But here's what's undeniable. It worked. By the 1920s and 1930s, North Carolina Mutual had become the largest black-owned business in the entire United States. C.C. Spaulding was so influential that he was nationally known as Mr. Negro Business. The company had assets in the millions of dollars, massive wealth by any standard, but especially remarkable for a black-owned business during Jim Crow. And here's where the story gets even more fascinating. Chapter 4. The empire expands the ecosystem of wealth. So we've established that CC and his partners built an insurance company and a bank. But that was just the beginning. This is where the Spaulding strategy reveals itself as truly revolutionary, because they understood something that modern wealth advisors are only now beginning to emphasize. Real generational wealth requires ownership across multiple sectors. Let me walk you through the ecosystem they built on Parish Street, Durham. Black Wall Street. First, there was North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company. By the 1940s, it was writing policies in 12 states and Washington, D.C., employing over 1,000 agents. Second, Mechanics and Farmers Bank, which, by the way, still exists today as North Carolina's oldest black-owned bank. Over 116 years of continuous operation. Let that sink in. But it didn't stop there. The Durham Drug Company opened, providing pharmaceuticals to the black community and employment for black pharmacists who were shut out of white-owned drugstores. The Bankers Fire Insurance Company was established to provide property insurance. Another sector where black people were being either denied coverage or charged discriminatory rates. They invested in real estate throughout Durham, creating rental properties and commercial spaces. They funded the North Carolina College for Negroes, which later became North Carolina Central University, ensuring that future generations would have access to higher education. Do you see the pattern here? This wasn't just about making money. This was about building institutional power that could withstand individual setbacks and generational transitions. And here's the fourth secret to the Spaulding wealth legacy. They were creating jobs, not just businesses. Think about it, every business they opened employed black workers. Those workers earned salaries, which they spent in other black-owned businesses on Parish Street. Those businesses needed supplies and services, which were provided by yet more black entrepreneurs. It was a multiplier effect that created wealth across an entire community, not just for a single family. But here's something fascinating that most people don't realize. C.C. Spaulding wasn't just a businessman. He was a mentor. He was a teacher. He was a philosopher of black capitalism. He developed what he called his 8 C's of success: capacity, capital, confidence in self, confidence in others, courage, common sense. And he didn't just preach these principles. Live them. He traveled across the country, giving speeches about black entrepreneurship. He mentored countless young business leaders. During the 1930s and 40 segundos, CC served on numerous boards and advisory committees. President Herbert Hoover appointed him to a committee on housing. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration consulted with him on issues affecting black Americans during the New Deal era. A black man from rural North Carolina, born 9 years after slavery ended, was advising presidents of the United States. Let me repeat that. C.C. Spaulding was advising presidents. But success at this level comes with complexities that aren't always comfortable to discuss. Chapter 5. The controversy. The costs of compromise. Now we need to talk about the elephant in the room, because the Spaulding story isn't just a feel-good tale of triumph. It's complicated. It's messy, and understanding these complications is crucial to understanding how black wealth has been built and maintained in America. Here's the uncomfortable truth. C.C. Spaulding was successful partly because he was seen as safe by white power structures. What do I mean by that? Well, while North Carolina Mutual was growing into a multi-million-dollar enterprise, the civil rights movement was beginning to gain momentum, and CC's approach to racial progress was, let's say, gradualist. He believed in education and economic development as the path to equality. He believed in proving black competence through business success. He believed that economic power would eventually lead to social and political power. But he was not a vocal advocate for immediate desegregation. He was not a radical agitator, demanding immediate change. And for that, he received significant criticism from more radical black leaders and intellectuals. W.E.B. Du Bois, the legendary scholar and activist, actually criticized the North Carolina Mutual model at times, arguing that it was too focused on accommodation and not focused enough on directly challenging white supremacy. So the question becomes, was C.C. Spaulding a brilliant strategist who built sustainable wealth by working within the system, Or was he too accommodating to that system? And here's the really complicated part. Could both things be true simultaneously? Let me give you a modern analogy. Imagine you're trying to build wealth and success in a system that's fundamentally biased against you. Do you fight the system head-on, risking everything you build? B, work within the system, accumulating power and resources that can eventually be used to change it? See, some combination of both. There's no objectively correct answer, and reasonable people can disagree about which approach is most effective or most ethical. What we do know is this: the wealth that C.C. Spaulding and his partners built wasn't destroyed. It wasn't burned down like Tulsa. It wasn't violently suppressed like Wilmington. It survived. And in surviving, it provided economic resources and opportunities for generations of black families in Durham and beyond. North Carolina Mutual insured black families when nobody else would. Mechanics and Farmers Bank gave black families mortgages when other banks wouldn't. The businesses on Paris Street employed black workers when other companies wouldn't hire them. These were real, tangible benefits that improved real lives. But here's another layer to this story that's absolutely crucial. The wealth was unjust kept within the Spaulding family, and this brings us to the fifth secret of their success: strategic wealth distribution. Unlike many American dynasties, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Vanderbilts, the Spaulding legacy was never about consolidating wealth in one family's hands. Sure, the Spaulding family did well financially, but the structure of North Carolina Mutual and the other businesses on Paris Street meant that wealth was intentionally distributed among multiple families, multiple stakeholders, multiple community members. This was both strategically smart and philosophically important. If white supremacists saw all the wealth concentrated in one black family, that family would become a target. But if the wealth was spread across an entire community, across multiple institutions, it was much harder to destroy. This is what we call today distributed power, and it is a concept that modern social movements are But the story doesn't end with C.C. Spaulding. Chapter 6. The Succession. Keeping wealth across generations here. That's a sobering statistic that I need you to understand. 70% of wealthy families lose their wealth by the second generation. By the third generation, that number jumps to 90%. 90%. Think about that. All the work, all the sacrifice, all the strategic thinking gone within 3 generations. So, how do you beat those odds? This is where the Spaulding dynasty reveals another crucial secret. Institutional wealth outlasts individual wealth. C.C. Spaulding died in 1952 at the age of 78. He had led North Carolina Mutual for over 50 years. By the time of his death, the company had over $40 million in assets and served over 400,000 policyholders across 14 states. But here's what's remarkable. The company didn't collapse after his death. Why? Because C.C. had spent decades building systems, not just personal empires. He had trained leaders. He had established processes. He had created a culture of excellence and community service that transcended any single individual. His nephew, Asa T. Spaulding, took over leadership of North Carolina Mutual after C.C.'s deaths. Asa had been trained by C.C., had worked his way up through the company, understood the business inside and out. This is the sixth secret. Generational wealth requires generational training. The Spaulding family didn't just pass down money. They passed down knowledge. They passed down skills. They passed down relationships and social capital. Asa T. Spaulding continued to grow North Carolina Mutual through the 1950s and 60s, a period that included the entire civil rights movement. The company provided critical financial backing for civil rights activists. It offered jobs to people who were fired for participating in protests or voter registration drives. In other words, the economic foundation that C.C. had built became infrastructure for the civil rights movement itself. Think about the long-term strategic thinking involved in that. C.C. built economic institutions in the early 1900s that became tools for social change in the 1960s. But here's where the story takes another interesting turn. As the civil rights movement succeeded and desegregation became law, something unexpected happened to Black Wall Street. Integration, ironically, became a challenge for black-owned businesses. Let me explain. When segregation ended, Black consumers suddenly had access to white-owned businesses that had previously excluded them. Larger companies with more resources and capital started competing for black dollars. And here is the uncomfortable question. Why would a black consumer choose a smaller, black-owned insurance company or bank when they could now access larger, more established, white-owned institutions? This is what some economists call the integration paradox. The very success of the civil rights movement created new competitive challenges for the black businesses that had sustained the community during Jim Crow. Many black-owned businesses didn't survive this transition, but North Carolina Mutual did. Mechanics and Farmers Bank did. How? This brings us to the seventh secret. Adaptation without abandonment of mission. These institutions didn't just rely on racial solidarity. They had built reputations for excellent service, competitive products, and community investment. They had financial literacy programs. They gave back to the community. They were embedded in the social fabric of Durham, so even as competition increased, they maintained loyal customer bases. But I won't lie to you, it hasn't been easy. Chapter 7. The Modern Era. Where are they now? So what happened to the Spaulding Dynasty? Where are they now? And what does Black Wall Street look like today? The answers to these questions reveal both the successes and the challenges of maintaining generational black wealth in America. North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company continued operations until 2018, when it was sold to AXA Equitable, a subsidiary of a French insurance conglomerate. After 119 years of operation, the company that C.C. Spaulding built was acquired. Now, some people saw this as a failure. The end of an era. The loss of a cultural institution. But here's another way to look at it. The company lasted 119 years. It survived the Jim Crow era, the Great Depression, World War II, the Civil Rights Movement, and the modern financial era. Very few companies of a NY ownership structure last that long. Mechanics and Farmers Bank, on the other hand, is still operating today as an independent black-owned institution. At 116 years old, it remains North Carolina's oldest black-owned bank. It has branches in Durham, Charlotte, Raleigh, and Winston-Salem. Think about what that represents. Through everything, through slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, the 2008 financial crisis, through all of it, this institution has survived. That's not just remarkable, that's nearly miraculous. As for the Spaulding family itself, descendants still live in Durham and throughout North Carolina. Many went into business, education, and public service. The family is among America's wealthiest in terms of pure net worth. Not billionaires like Oprah or Robert Smith. But here's what they are. They're educated. They're professionals. They're community leaders. They represent stable, multi-generational middle and upper middle class success. And you know what? For a family descended from people who were likely enslaved just a generation before C.C. was born, that's actually an incredible achievement. But here is the really important question. What lessons can we extract from this story that apply today? Because let's be honest, that's what you clicked on this video for, right? Not just history, but applicable wisdom. So let's break it down. Chapter 8. The lessons what the Spaulding Dynasty teaches us about building wealth today. All right, let's get practical. What can we learn from the Spaulding family's century-long journey? What strategies can we apply in 2025? Lesson number 1. Solve a real problem for your community. C.C. Spaulding didn't start North Carolina Mutual because he wanted to get rich. He started it because there was a genuine need in his community that wasn't being met. Black families needed life insurance. They needed financial services. They needed dignity in death. He solved that problem. So here is my question for you. What problem exists in your community that you're uniquely positioned to solve? It doesn't have to be something massive. It doesn't have to revolutionize the world. But it should be real, and it should serve people who need it. That's how sustainable businesses are built, not by chasing trends, but by serving needs. Lesson number 2. Build systems, not just income streams. This is Hug, and it's where most people fail at building generational wealth. C.C. didn't just create a job for himself. He didn't just make money. He built an institution, He created systems that could operate without him. He trained leaders. He documented processes. He established a culture, and that's why North Carolina Mutual survived for 119 years, long after CC himself was gone. If you want generational wealth, you can't just be the smartest person in the room or the hardest worker. You have to build systems that multiply your impact and outlast your individual effort. Lesson number 3. Create a closed-loop economic ecosystem. Remember how North Carolina Mutual, Mechanics, and Farmers Bank, Durham Drug Company, and all those other businesses on Parish Street created a reinforcing economic cycle. That's something we've lost in modern black communities. And frankly, in many communities, period. Money comes in and immediately flows out to corporations headquartered in other states or other countries. But what if you intentionally spent more of your money with businesses owned by people in your community? What if those business owners did the same? What if wealth started circulating within your community multiple times before leaving? That's called a multiplier effect, and it's how generational community wealth is built. Lesson 4. Education is non-negotiable. Sensei. Spaulding was obsessed with education. He personally mentored young business people. He gave speeches at colleges. He supported educational institutions. And the Spaulding family has maintained that commitment across generations. Here is the thing about education. It is the one form of wealth that can't be taken from you. It can't be taxed, can't be seized, can't be devalued by inflation. The knowledge, skills, and critical thinking abilities you develop are portable assets that travel with you wherever you go. That's why truly wealthy families invest heavily in education for every generation, not just formal schooling, but mentorship, travel, exposure to different industries and ideas. Lesson 5. A strategic patience, bit reactive, hustle sincere. Spaulding started with $1.12 in revenue the first month. He didn't become a millionaire overnight. He built slowly, strategically, sustainably. We live in an age of get-rich-quick schemes, viral businesses, overnight success stories. And look, occasionally someone does hit it big fast. But you know what? Most of those fast fortunes disappear just as quickly. The Spaulding model was about consistent, patient, strategic growth over decades. That's not sexy. That's not going to get you 1 million TikTok followers. But it works. Lesson number 6. Political and social capital are forms of wealth. C.C. Spaulding advised presidents. He sat on national committees. He had relationships with powerful people across racial lines. That access, those relationships, that influence, those are forms of capital just as real as money in the bank. Those relations say, who knows you? When you need something, a job, an introduction, advice, investment, who can you call? Building your network, contributing to your community, establishing a reputation for integrity and competencies, things matter. Don't just accumulate money. Accumulate relationships and trust. Lesson number 7. Institutionalize your wealth. This is perhaps the most important lesson for generational wealth building. The Spaulding family didn't just pass down money to their kids. They passed down ownership in institutions, membership in networks, positions in businesses, and a culture of excellence and service. What are you building that will outlast you? What institutions are you creating or contributing to that will serve your community and your family for generations? That might be a business. It might be a foundation. It might be a trust fund that is structured to teach financial literacy to each generation that accesses it. But it needs to be something more than just a pile of money, because piles of money get spent. Institutions endure. So that's enough lessons for today. If you want to learn more, write it in the comments, and see you in the next one.